Welcome to the Clayton Tyner podcast, where I help you view current issues through the ancient wisdom of Scripture. This week, presidential hopeful RFK Jr. clarified his stance on two key issues. One swung drastically to the right, and the other about as far as possible to the left. What explains his sudden clarity on these topics and his decision to go with them? The Boy Scouts officially changed their name to Scouting America, sparking outrage from many corners of the internet. However, this change is not new. In fact, it has been years in the making. The real story might be how the Girl Scouts of America feel about this change. Adult film star Stormy Daniels took the stand in Trump's hush money case and filled the courtroom with salacious details of her and Trump's romantic encounter. Many have made the point that her testimony ultimately had no bearing on the case and shouldn't have been allowed. However, there's an even bigger issue with the whole situation that no one seems to be talking about. And one look at the sudden rise in legacy media admitting that the COVID-19 vaccine may have risks and side effects. After years of pushing and maybe even propagandizing, the tide has now shifted, and both the New York Times and Chris Cuomo, among others, are singing a different tune. Why the sudden change, and what can we learn from this? Let's find out together on episode 62 of the Clayton Tyner podcast. All right, we made it to episode 62. I want to thank you for rocking with the podcast. I want to remind you to get busy in the comments. Make sure you smash that like button, that you subscribe to the channel. If you don't do anything else, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell so you know when new podcasts come out. That really, really helps keep the momentum going. I am so grateful to my longtime listeners who have been rocking all the way back from episode 1. And I'm so grateful for those of you who are just checking this out for the first time. If you are new to the podcast, my name's Clayton. I'm the senior pastor of Meta Church in San Antonio, Texas. And so my real job is every week to write a sermon where I start in the text of Scripture, try to exegete that to the best of my ability, preach it, and help our people apply it into their lives. However, I started the podcast to kind of reverse engineer, where I look at things going on in the culture, real stories in the news, and then do my best to look at those from a biblical perspective. And hopefully what this does is help Christians come out of our echo chambers and our very bifurcated society and find some nuance where we can be effective in our mission. And for those who are watching that are not Christians, that you can kind of see what a biblically infused worldview would look like. Now, if you want to help support the show, you can go to patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. This week is our live monthly Q&A, where instead of me just talking at you, we all jump into a Google Meet together. I look forward to this every single month. You guys bring incredible questions, and it's not too late. So sign up today, patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. You can help me cover the costs of running this podcast, and we can be in community with each other and have real conversations. Really, really exciting stuff. We have some important stories to get to, so let's get to our first 3 points. RFK Jr. is certainly the dark horse in the presidential race right now. However, he is polling higher than any third-party candidate, I think, since Ross Perot. And if you remember, Ross Perot significantly changed the outcome of that election. So RFK is going to have a say in who becomes our next president. It is unlikely at this point that he himself is our next president. Nothing is impossible. We have an 82-year-old and a 78-year-old who are running, so anything's possible, but he's making a lot of news, and the people who are supporting him are all in on supporting him. The question people have is, which way do we categorize him? Is RFK more to the right because he has echoed some sentiments about vaccine hesitancy, and he has some conservative leanings, kind of more classical liberal leanings, which typically is a lot of the Republican Party today? Or is he obviously left, where he stands on environmental issues and right to life issues? He's kind of played this middle game. And so people have been guessing, who does he take more votes away from? Who does he hurt more in the general election? Does he hurt Biden, or does he hurt Trump? Well, there's a couple of issues that he's been kind of clear, but also not fully clear on, that he got clear on over the last week, kind of in rapid succession. The first is on the issue of children transitioning genders. He's kind of played the middle. He's been asked pretty directly on several podcasts and in town halls, and his answer has been, I just don't know enough about it. Well, that is no longer his answer. He came out on Twitter this week and said the following: the more I learn, the more troubled I have become about giving puberty blockers to youth. Minors cannot drive, vote, join the army, get a tattoo, smoke, or drink because we know that children do not fully understand the consequences of decisions with lifelong ramifications. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for skills like planning, prioritizing, and making good decisions, doesn't fully mature until the early to mid-20s. I don't think children can genuinely consent to repurposed castration drugs, puberty blockers, and surgical mutilation, which have permanent, irreversible effects. People with gender dysphoria or who want to change their gender deserve compassion and respect, but these terribly consequential procedures should be deferred until adulthood. We must protect our children. Now, where does this put RFK within the general population? It may not be evident on Twitter, which is basically just highlights of echo chambers, but when it comes to the general U.S. population, this puts RFK right in line with most people. Most people have somewhat of a live and let live idea for adults. However, when it comes to children, when it comes to minors, we don't feel that way, and for good reasons. So he's kind of stepped into the mainstream fray. And anytime a politician says, I just don't know enough, I'm not educated enough about it, I think, at least for me, my response is, well, get educated. Like, you're running for president of the United States.
Wow.
You got to get educated on this. So you can't just take one of the seminal issues of our time and say, pass. It doesn't work that way. You got to form an opinion. And so he's been under pressure to do that. And he has always been a Democrat. He broke with the Democrat ranks by taking this position and by saying, I don't think this is a good idea. I think we have to wait. Today, the typical Democrat talking point is if gender dysphoria actually should be cured by transitioning, which that's a big if, but that is the left side, is it is cured by transition and it's real, then we got to just start this as young as possible. And if you allow them to go through puberty, then you're going to really be hurting them. Everyone else has looked at the actual data or just used kind of their common sense to say, it seems like we should wait and we shouldn't have kids making these irreversible changes. And so it's a good statement, but it is seen as a flip-flop on what he has said in the past, like the not so recent past. In the not so recent past, he just kind of pled the fifth, which again, can't do that running for president. And now he's finally come out and made his statement. So people who are more on the left side of this issue, of course, are very angry. And you can see it in the comments. And people who are on the right of this issue, even Elon Musk, I think one of the very first highlighted responses to or replies on Twitter is Elon Musk throwing up the 100 sign, like, yes, thanks for getting on board with this. So, of course, reactions are divided. Within the same week, he came out and made his opinions clear on what he thinks about abortion. And while his swing might be seen as to the right when it comes to issues of gender and identity, his swing on abortion is so far to the left that he has now outflanked basically everyone in the race. Let's take a look at his interview with Sage Steele.
Should there be a limit? Or you're saying all the way up through full term, a woman has a right to have an abortion?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any woman ever in history has said, I'm going to have a baby. I'm going to get pregnant and carry that baby to 8 months of term, and then I'm going to terminate the pregnancy. I don't think anybody wants to do that. We should leave it to the woman. We shouldn't have government involved.
Even if it's full term?
Even if it's full term. I think we have to leave it to the woman rather than the state.
Okay.
So I think we should do everything in our power to make sure that never happens, and everything that we can do. And but I think ultimately, nobody sets out to do that. And there are always some kind of extenuating circumstances that would make a mother make that kind of choice.
So he says, on a moral level, and he has said this in interviews before, that he thinks abortion is heartbreaking, a travesty. I don't know that he would say it's immoral, but that it is morally not good. And he then says, when it comes to full-term abortion, which, by the way, means that the baby is fully formed, like could be ready to be delivered, right, is viable outside of the womb and will have to be delivered either way because it's a full-term baby. he's saying we should do everything within our power to make sure that that doesn't happen. Except the one thing that would ensure it doesn't happen, which is outlawing it. So this is like joining the ranks of the most radical pro-choice politicians in the country. And what he's doing is he's making a very simple argument in its essence, which is I'm going to hold a standard, and that standard is going to determine everything. There's no nuance. So it's just up to the woman. So if the baby is, 10 months along, that's fine. If the baby is ready to be born 40 weeks, that's fine. Now, I'm assuming outside of the womb, so, 7 seconds later, if you're all the way full term and about to give birth, 7 seconds later, then no, that all of a sudden is obviously murder. 3 weeks after the child is delivered, obviously murder. But full term, so this is as far to the left as you can go. And then his first position is going to be seen as going like as far to the right as you can go, because now you're not going to allow minors who the left's talking point is are in desperate need of some kind of transition pre-puberty, or else it's this grave evil. And they'll even say you're going to cause kids to take their own lives if you don't do this. And so he's gone to polar ends all in the same week on different subjects. So how do we think about this? What is RFK doing here? Why is he taking these positions? And the real answer is we just don't know. We can't know exactly his thought process. He seems like a very logical guy, but there does seem to be some illogical thinking, especially when it comes to the abortion issue and going so far radical that for sure, a lot of people who are on the right and are like all of us, just not happy with either of the candidates, and we're considering RFK, are not going to be able to get on board with him for that reason. And we see this all the time. The question is he flip-flopping? Is he making his decisions out of convenience of decisions, or is he making them based on some form of conviction? And I want to know what you think. Is he just have these convictions and he's really thought through, or is he a typical politician and is he flip-flopping? We see this all the time. Proverbs 25:19 says, like a broken tooth or a lame foot is reliance on the unfaithful in a time of trouble. Reliance on the unfaithful. Reliance on those who change positions. Reliance on those who just go wherever the wind is blowing. And it does seem from the outside a little bit like he was pressured in to his decision on puberty blockers and irreversible sex changes, because that is where the consensus is at. And he was getting hammered online for his lack of decisiveness on this. And so it feels, just based on the track record of other politicians, that he kind of went where the majority is. Now, disagree with that if you don't think that's what happened. It's just kind of my read on it. And then within the same week, in order to shore up his bona fides as someone who's also a person of the left, he goes to the extremes, almost seemingly to balance things out. And what I know I desire in politicians, and maybe this is just such optimistic thinking that it's foolish. I get that. But I desire people who, like Jesus said, their yes is a yes and their no is a no. And they don't make their policies out of convenience or popularity. They have their opinions and politics based on conviction. Jesus said, all you need is to simply say yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Anything beyond this is moving into the line of deception, where this isn't really who I am. I'm just an empty coat for whatever policies might get me a little bit further ahead in the race. RFK doesn't seem like that guy to me. He seems like a guy who stands on principle. He also seems like a guy who really wants to be president. And so some people start to compromise on principles along the way. But what do you think about this? What do you think about him going way far right and way far left on these two different issues? Is this a matter of conviction? Is this where he actually stands? Or is this a matter of convenience and him trying to read the tea leaves and make the right decisions to position him well to really challenge Joe Biden and Donald Trump? The Boy Scouts of America is officially changing their name to Scouting America. We'll look at a report from AP News. It says Boy Scouts of America changing name to more inclusive Scouting America after years of woes. The Boy Scouts of America announced after 114 years that it will change its name and will become Scouting America in an effort to emphasize inclusion as it works to move past the turmoil of bankruptcy and a flood of sexual abuse claims. The rebrand is another seismic shift for an organization steeped in tradition that did not allow gay youths or girls to begin joining its ranks until relatively recently. Seeking to boost flagging membership numbers, the Irving, Texas-based organization announced the name change Tuesday at its annual meeting in Florida. In the next 100 years, we want any youth in America to feel very, very welcome to come into our programs. The change will officially take place on February 8th, 2025, timed to the organization's 115th birthday. The organization began allowing gay youth in 2013 and ended a blanket on gay adult leaders in 2015. In 2017, it made the historic announcement that girls would be accepted as Cub Scouts as of 2018 and into the flagship Boy Scout program in 2019. Now, we'll look at some of these numbers because the Boy Scouts are really in trouble. In 2018, they had 2 million scouts signed up. Now, remember, 2018 is the year that they began to allow girls to come in, starting as Cub Scouts all the way through Eagle Scouts. Now, in 2024, they're down to 1 million. And so since that change and since the introduction of girls into the Boy Scouts, they have dropped in half from 2 million scouts down to 1 million. Now, a lot of things happened during that time, a global pandemic. And so we can't just take a univariable approach and say because girls are in now, it dropped in half. However, we can look at a broader trend all the way back in 1972. This was the peak of Boy Scouts. There were 5 million Boy Scouts, 5 million boys in Boy Scouts. In 1972, the population of America was roughly 200 million people, and there were 5 million Boy Scouts. In 2024, there's 350 plus million population in America, and there's only 1 million scout, and that number continues to drop. So they have now completely changed where it's not even called Boy Scouts. It was Boy Scouts, but like asterisk, girls can come, right? So
wow,
kind of misleading in some ways. And so they're like, well, we'll line it up. And now it's just called Scouting America, and their numbers continue to plummet. Proverbs 4:25-26 says, let your eyes look directly forward and your gaze be straight before you. Ponder the path of your feet and all your ways will be sure. The Boy Scouts started to help young men specifically have a space outside of all other influences, including the very powerful influence of girls your age. When you get boys around girls their age, they lose their minds. It's just what happens. And I mean, that doesn't change, I guess, until maybe you die.
Wow.
So to consolidate young men into an arena where they are segmented off and are able to learn values and how to be a good citizen, how to be trustworthy, how to have useful skills in the world. This was the claim of Boy Scouts, is that you would become a better person, a stronger man, and a better citizen. And that has now changed. They took their eyes off of the intended target for this, and they've had all kinds of trouble. And, they started taking their eyes off when they started having all kinds of allegations of abuse and sexual abuse and all of these horrible, horrific things and cover-ups, and didn't try to deal with it correctly. And now, by taking the very purpose of this and doing away with it. Now, the question is that fair to girls? Well, it certainly is, because there's also something called the Girl Scouts, where girls can get away from the undue pressure and social scenarios that are created by boys being around them and learn their own skills and grow in their own character. Here's what's interesting. Everyone is reporting on this as if this is something brand new. Like this just happened in 2024. They just changed their name. No big deal. That's not actually the case. We're going to look at an article from CNN. It says Girl Scouts sue the Boy Scouts over name change. This didn't happen yesterday. If you look, it happened November 7th, 2018. So this is not something new. This is something that's been going on for a while. Now, why would the Girl Scouts sue the Boy Scouts over changing their name? Let's look at the article. A long-running dispute between Scouts has now ended up in a Manhattan court. The Girl Scouts of the USA has filed a trademark infringement lawsuit against the Boy Scouts of America after it announced that it would drop boy from the name of a program in 2019. The boys group has already begun to welcome older girls. The Girl Scouts said in the complaint filed in the Manhattan federal court Tuesday that the Boy Scouts do not have the right to use Scouts or Scouting. It also alleged that the Girl Scouts brand and activities will be marginalized by the Boy Scouts rebranded program, Scouts, BSA. The Girl Scouts said the change has caused confusion among the public, causing them to think the Girl Scouts did not exist or had merged with the Boy Scouts. Only Girl Scouts USA has the right to use the Girl Scouts and Scouts trademark with leadership development services for girls. We applaud every organization that builds character and leadership in children, including the Girl Scouts of the USA, and believe there's an opportunity for both organizations to serve girls and boys in our communities, it said in a statement. The lawsuit seeks monetary damages and a permanent injunction against trademark infringement. So what are they saying? The Girl Scouts are saying you're creating confusion. And I have no doubt, as a matter of fact, one of the first things that I Googled after I heard the Boy Scouts were changing their name is whether or not the Girl Scouts were changing their name. Are the Girl Scouts going to now allow boys in? And their answer is hard pass.
Wow.
We don't want any stinky boys in our program.
Boom. Roasted.
So a lot of times you try something with good intentions. And I do love the idea of there being a program that is inclusive of boys and girls, and that is character building. And I think there is space for that. Now, for me, I'm the pastor of a local church. I think that happens in your local church. And, you know, you have a solid youth program and you get, you know, young men and women together and they learn together and they grow together and they inspire one another. I think that's wonderful. It's just not why the Boy Scouts were created. It's not why the Girl Scouts were created. And the Girl Scouts are pointing out that the unintended consequence of the Boy Scouts becoming inclusive of girls is that it will hurt the Girl Scouts, is that it will create confusion with the Girl Scouts. And the very people they're now seeking to serve, Scouting USA, which is like, we also want to help girls, is potentially going to hurt the organization that has existed for a very long time, specifically to help girls do the very things as a scout that you're now trying to do inclusively. There's all kinds of unintended consequences. Scripture acknowledges this. Proverbs 16:25 says there's a way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death. It appears to be right, but in the end, it causes destruction. It wreaks havoc. In the 1930s, Australia was having a huge problem with a beetle called the cane beetle. It was significantly damaging their crops. And so in order to deal with the cane beetle, they brought in a certain kind of toad. They named them cane toads because their hope is they would eat all the cane beetles and then their agriculture would start to thrive again. Instead, the cane toad was very poisonous to species that already lived in Australia, and the cane toads multiplied like crazy. And so pretty soon the cane toads had taken over and were doing huge damage to the species that already lived there. It became an invasive species. And even to this day, it has damaged the population, the native population of animals in Australia. You try to solve one problem, but when you don't think through unintended consequences of veering off the path where you started, then you can hurt the very thing that you're trying to help. And we should really consider that when we set out and we have a goal and we have a vision and we have a calling, we must stay the course. And you see this happen in the church as well. We have a very clear call, and the call is to be the movement of Jesus, to go into all the world and to make disciples. And it's so easy to get sidetracked. And we think that we should soften the edges of the commands of God, or that we should not preach the whole truth of Scripture, or we shouldn't talk about sin, or we shouldn't talk about hell. And anytime we change the mission that we've been put on, there will be unintended consequences. And instead, we should seek to model our lives like Jesus, to speak the truth unapologetically, to love like Jesus, which is the highest call, to love God and to love others, and to leave the results up to Him. And if you have a mission as the Boy Scouts to raise up young men and to help them become highly skilled, valuable members of society, then you should stay on mission. And by getting off mission, there will be unintended consequences. Stormy Daniels took the stand in the hush money trial of Donald Trump and filled the room with all kinds of tawdry, salacious details about her sexual encounter with Donald Trump, which of course he denies out of hand, but does seem like it actually happened. And people have all kinds of opinions about this. We'll look at what actually happened. And what I want to focus on is the thing no one seems to be thinking about. Again, unintended consequences down the line, because we're such a culture of instant gratification. We're not thinking about the results of this 10 years down the road or 100 years down the road. We'll look at the story from AP News. Stormy Daniels delivers shocking testimony about Trump, but trial hinges on business records. And you're going to see why people said she shouldn't have even been put on the stand. And odds are she was only allowed on the stand at some level to embarrass Donald Trump. It says, Donald Trump's defense attorney on Thursday accused Stormy Daniels of slowly altering the details of an alleged 2006 sexual encounter with Trump, trying to convince jurors that a key prosecution witness in the former president's hush money criminal trial cannot be believed. You've made all of this up, right? Trump's lawyer asked. No, Daniel shot back. As a jury looked on, the two women traded barbs over what Trump's lawyer said were inconsistencies in Daniel's description of the encounter with Trump in a Nevada hotel suite. He denies the whole story. But despite all the talk over what may have happened in that hotel room, despite the discomfiting testimony by the adult film actor that she consented to sex in part because of a power imbalance, the case against Trump doesn't rise or fall on whether her account is true or even believable. It's a trial about money changing hands, business transactions, and whether those payments were made to illegally influence the 2016 election. We're already in uncharted waters. We're in unprecedented territory with the former president of the United States and the current frontrunner by most available polling in the 2024 election being put on trial. He is being put on trial at the state level for a federal crime that he was never federally prosecuted for, which is why Trump supporters are saying this seems a lot like a witch hunt. This seems like really grasping for straws. At the same time, he is on trial, and all of this has to do with an alleged affair with an adult film star, Stormy Daniels, that was signed an NDA and then paid a whole bunch of money, $130,000 to not talk about it, which of course she has talked about it and written about it in her book. And she took the stand. And part of the issue people are pointing out is that, number one, she shouldn't have been on the stand. What happened in that hotel room doesn't actually affect what the trial is about. It is a distraction and it is a defamation of sorts. As you're going to see at the end of this video, the defamation is Trump putting himself in this situation in the first place. It is defaming and it is immoral and it is disappointing. So regardless, should she have been on the stand? Probably not. Did she stick to her story? It appears she didn't. And it's not just far right-wing extremists who think that. Here's Bill Maher, who is certainly a person of the left, kind of a classic liberal, who uniquely has an opinion because he sat down with Stormy Daniels and talked to her about this previously. And here's his take on how her story has changed.
And first I asked her why she had sex with Trump. Listen to that. And then listen to what she says after that. And then we're going to talk about the trial because it's quite a variance of what she said to me in 2018. Why did you Donald Trump?
I have no idea.
Okay. But you say it's not a Me Too case.
It is not a Me Too case. I mean, I wasn't assaulted. I wasn't attacked or raped or coerced or blackmailed. They tried to shove me in the Me Too box to further their own agenda. And first of all, I didn't want any part of that because it's not the truth. And I'm not a victim in that regard.
That's not what she's saying now. She's talking about he was bigger and blocking the way. It's all the Me Too buzzwords. She said there was a power imbalance of power for sure. My hands were shaking so hard. She said she blacked out. Blacked out? She's a porn star.
All right. So he starts making jokes that are not appropriate for the Clayton Tyner podcast at that point. But he's pointing out, I sat down with Stormy Daniels and she was very, very clear. There's no power imbalance. This was not a Me Too case. I was not attacked. This was fully consensual. And now she takes the stand and reverses that testimony. It just seems to be pointing at damaging Trump as significantly as possible. And so we'll see what happens. This looks like the only case that will happen prior to the election. We'll see what the verdict is. It seems like a shaky case, and it is tabloid fodder. It gives everyone an opportunity to look at Trump's past indiscretions. And is that fair? I don't know. When you sign up to be president of the United States, you can kind of assume that people are going to dig through every single bit of dirt that you have in your life as possible. And Donald Trump lived basically his entire adult life as a playboy, a philanderer, a ladies' man, and he has a lot of dirt to dig up. He has the Access Hollywood tape, and he has this encounter with Stormy Daniels, which is now officially a part of history. I mean, we have a former president potentially future president, we'll see how the election goes, who is on the stand and has an adult film actress taking the stand, sharing with the world details about a sexual encounter that they had. And so what are we not thinking about? What I can't help but think about, because my mind is wired to typically think more future than present, is what are we leaving our kids? Here's what Proverbs 13 says. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the sinner's wealth is laid up for the righteous. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. You see, I don't think we've had a situation, certainly in American history before, and maybe not in the history of the world, now that we're in the internet age, where we have the leader of an empire, the leader of the free world, who has a past history with a star. So how do we go about the future of historical education? Because that's part of what you do when you're a kid, when you're in elementary and middle school, is you learn United States history. You learn the history of your presidents. And we now have, because of Trump's past behavior, having a sexual encounter with an adult film star while his actual wife is pregnant. And that leads to hush money, which leads to a criminal charge, which leads to a statement on the stand from that adult film star. And now this is a part of the historical record. And look, you can learn in elementary or middle school about Bill Clinton, and they can use their words very, very carefully. And you can learn about Monica Lewinsky, and you can Google as a kid that whole thing to write a research paper on it. And you're going to be pretty safe. There's no images. There's no videos. Monica Lewinsky was an intern. She is not someone who made her career as someone who has sex on camera. Stormy Daniels is a different story. How does a 7th grader write about this crazy, unprecedented period in American history where we have these contentious elections, a global pandemic, a president on trial across multiple different charges? How does he write about that and look all of this up without accidentally looking at lewd images or videos of Stormy Daniels? I don't know. I'm not sure that you can assign this period out to someone in middle school, certainly not elementary school, high school, without them coming up on X-rated material. That's where we're at. And yes, it is because of prosecutions that seem to be unfair. If you just look at the fact pattern, regardless of political affiliation, they seem like very shaky cases. But more than that, because of the sordid past of Donald Trump and these decisions that he made. And we tend to just think right now. And if you're on the right, then you're thinking these trials are BS and he should win them and we got to walk away. And the more they put him on trial, the more they're boosting his poll numbers. And if you're on the left, you're thinking he's guilty and we got to get him and we got to put him in jail. But who's thinking about the future? And who's thinking about what we're leaving for our children? And who's thinking about the quality of political candidates, left and right, who have these kinds of histories and these kinds of interactions with people that our kids won't be able to safely Google in 20 years. Our grandkids won't be able to write research papers on without being exposed to things that none of us want them exposed to. The decisions that we make today, like leave an inheritance for our children's children. They're generational. Our decisions today are generational in nature. There's a great example of this in the life of King Josiah. His story's in 2 Kings, starting in 22. In chapter 22, he becomes king at only 8 years old. And there's been this huge string of evil kings. And then there's Josiah. And partly because Josiah has a righteous mom and he follows the ways of King David and he loves the Lord. When he turns about 26, the scriptures, the Jewish scriptures, are discovered hidden in the temple, and he finds them, and it's the word of instruction from the Lord, and he just starts instituting changes. And what's been happening previous to him is there was a legacy of idolatry, and the reason that he couldn't find the scriptures is because they were in the back of the temple, buried underneath all the paraphernalia of idolatry. We read about this in 2 Kings 23. It says, then the king commanded the high priest and the priest of the second rank and the doorkeepers to bring out of the Lord's sanctuary. This is what was in the Lord's sanctuary. All the articles made for Baal Asherah and all the stars in the sky. He burned them outside Jerusalem in the fields of the Kidron and carried their ashes to Bethel. Then he did away with the idolatrous priests the kings of Judah had appointed to burn incense at the high places. They had burned incense to Baal, to the sun, moon, constellations, and stars. He brought out the Asherah pole from the Lord's temple. This is a sex cult idol that's in the Lord's temple. And he burned it in the Kidron Valley, beat it to dust, and threw its dust on the graves of the common people. And he tore down, listen, the houses of male cult prostitutes that were in the Lord's temple, where women were weaving tapestries for Asherah. Again, the fertility cult, the sex goddess. This is what was in the temple. This is the legacy that he inherited from his father and his father's father. And look what he's doing. He's taking it all out. He's burning it. If it's still like in kind of large embers, he's beating it into dust and throwing it as far as the east is from the west. Why? Well, number one, to put people back in line with the Lord and what the Lord wants for his people. But number two, to spare his children and his children's children and on through the generations of having to come up under this in their life as well. I just think that we're not considering our grandkids who will be looking back on this time of history, and so much of what happened will hopefully be mind-blowing because we'll have found some common sense by then, but also will just be perverse in nature and something that they really don't even have the capacity to look at. In all of our decisions, personal, political, communal, we should be thinking not just about right now, but about our children's children. And now let's get to our last section. In the early 20th century, Joseph Stalin took over Russia, and one of the first things he started doing was collectivization via land grabs and cooperative farming, which it wasn't really like, hey, would you cooperate with us? It's like, cooperate with us or we will severely punish you and throw you in prison or kill you. And so it was collective farming, and the idea was we will usher in this utopia and everyone will have enough and everyone will be able to eat, and this will be this beautiful place and will be the shining light for the world to see. And of course, what actually happened is millions of people starved to death. Now, slowly, they began to change those policies so they didn't end up starving off their entire population, but they never apologized for them. And after Joseph Stalin died, they really cemented a new way of life, but they never admitted exactly what happened in the 1930s. And they began to rewrite the history books and to push propaganda and to gaslight the population into believing that what Joseph Stalin did was actually for the greater good, and any unintended consequences were just that. They were kind of like, you want to make an omelet, you got to crack a few eggs. Gaslit the society into thinking that these terrible decisions and these terrible policies that they pushed and propagandized for were all the way clean as the driven snow. Just so happened maybe a couple million people died. We won't really talk about that, and we will move on. Unfortunately, that kind of gaslighting, an inability to admit when a government was wrong, is nothing new. And we're seeing maybe a smaller version of that over the last several years. In the last couple of weeks, legacy media figures have come out and started admitting that maybe the COVID-19 vaccine, which was pushed with the full force of every possible thing that the community, government, media had to throw at us, maybe they weren't as safe and as effective as we were told. The New York Times ran an article this last week that said thousands believe COVID vaccines harmed them. Is anyone listening? All vaccines have at least occasional side effects, but people who say they were injured by COVID vaccines believe their cases have been ignored. Within minutes of getting the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine, Michelle Zimmerman felt pain racing up her left arm to her ear and down her fingertips. Within days, she was unbearably sensitive to light and struggled to remember simple facts. The article goes on, not only about the pain and devastation of this, but about people not listening, and there seeming to be political forces that are keeping medical professionals from taking COVID vaccine injuries seriously. So that's what the New York Times is saying today. But what were they saying in 2021, 2022? Well, here's a video from the New York Times, and it's called Dying in the Name of Vaccine Freedom. This is from 2 years ago.
It's hard to watch the pandemic drag on as Americans refuse the vaccine in the name of freedom.
You're talking about an unproven, untested vaccine that doesn't even seem to really protect people because people who have gotten the vaccine are getting sick.
I went to one of the places with the worst vaccination rate.
I don't want a poison forced into me.
I'm tired of y'all trying to control us.
One of the best things we have is our own God-given natural antibodies.
It also has one of the worst COVID case rates in the country, the Ozarks.
So if you listen to everything that these people in the Ozarks who are being framed, right, as the ignorant dregs of society, you know, if you listen to everything that they're saying, every medical professional is admitting those things are right now, that we do have natural antibodies, that if you have had COVID previously, that you have some level of immunity. They are admitting that this was a vaccine that was rushed significantly quicker than anything else that has gone out. And it was brand new technology. It wasn't even really a vaccine, which if you notice, they don't really call it that anymore. But this entire article is written to try and shame people and make people seem like fools who were not willing at that time to take the vaccine. And you lived through this. You remember this. You were crazy if you weren't going to get the vaccine and get the booster and get the next booster and next booster. And that's fine. And maybe you really did your research and you did that. That was great. I was leading a church all through that. And man, I just told people to do their research and make the best decision for them. We were not going to politicize it. My main point is we went from this to now the same company, the New York Times, pushing like, man, people have been injured by these vaccines and nobody's listening to them. And they felt so much pressure to take them. Isn't that weird? We'll look at another person who was really, really pushing and arguing with people who were not taking the vaccine for themselves, which is Chris Cuomo. His tune has also completely changed. Here's him talking to a medical professional who took the vaccine and has experienced serious side effects. And Cuomo actually shares that he has faced side effects as well. Let's look at that.
And that testing showed I developed several autoantibodies, many of them that some theorists or some scientists believe are attributed to this POTS or positional tachycardia that you mentioned, where every time I stand, my heart zooms. So some of my autoantibodies look similar to people with long COVID, and I never had COVID. And that was proven through immunological studies of my blood. They could not find any viral antibodies.
We don't even really have an official finding on long COVID. And I know that's weird because I say that I have long COVID, but I only say that I have long COVID because the doctors who are treating me are calling it long COVID. Wow. And they say that they're not getting a whole lot of support from the government because even though we are spending a lot of money in the U.S. On a specific effort to research long COVID, they take a long time. And I think there's really no incentive to get out in front of this because it's just bad PR, right? I mean, nobody's going to get patted on the back for saying, yeah, Sean's right. There's side effects on some of the vaccines or all of the vaccines that we should be talking about and figuring out how to treat. And there is long COVID and there's lots. Nobody wants to say that because it's all political now.
Right. And we're caught in the crosshairs of the politics. I thought all my
So we'll keep playing it. But I mean, anyone who was paying attention during quarantine and during lockdowns, it's difficult to hear Cuomo say, well, this was just all so political. It's like, hey, no joke, dude. Like, you were on the bleeding edge of that. Yes, it was political. And that's not, to me, the craziest thing he says.
Vaccine colleagues that championed me would be there to lift me up and help me. And in fact, they're the ones who turned around, dismissed, denied, and tried to censor and bury me.
What do they think? You're chasing money?
What's that?
What do they think? You're chasing money?
I think that it's just the taboo around, like you said, about vaccines. They're afraid that by showing my face, I'll drive vaccine hesitancy. But what they don't realize, and what I have come to realize, is that the censorship and the hiding of it is actually fueling vaccine hesitancy. If the government had just said, hey, these are novel vaccines, we don't, there will be reactions. Let's just have a program in place to deal with them, set up the fund, obligate the manufacturers to provide help or research. I think the citizens would have appreciated that.
They would have appreciated that. And really, that was my desire, is just honest reporting throughout the whole debacle, is just to go, hey, we have this vaccine. Here's what it is. Here's what the mRNA technology actually is. Here's what the data is showing. Here's how it skews in its efficacy across ages. Here's who we think should consider taking it, but you are taking some risk to yourself, and this is unproven, and so you just need to know that. Like, if everyone would have just been up front and trusted the public to make some decisions for themselves, that would have been beautiful. It's like, hey, here's what could happen. Really think through this. Talk with your loved ones. We would love for you to get it. We think it's going to be effective. But no, it's like, you'll never get COVID again, and you'll never spread COVID again, and it's completely safe, and it's the best thing that's ever been created, and God himself made it, and everyone's got to take it. And it's like, well, maybe, but I mean, do we know that for a fact, like for sure? And here's the craziest thing is Cuomo said, none of the medical professionals are reaching out to this guy or helping this guy or saying anything or doing anything. And he goes, do you think they were just following the money? Chris, your network's #1 advertiser. You'll never guess who it was. Brought to you by Pfizer. Come on, dude. You were funded by Pfizer, and now you're throwing shade because people are following the money? You're saying the medical professionals aren't taking the VAR's reporting system seriously because they're following the money? Dude, you were paid by the people who manufactured the vaccines for the whole pandemic. And so this is so wild. And if we remember back to how Cuomo was, here's him with Byron Donald. Now, this is a clip from the PBD podcast. And what they're asking, they're showing him this clip, and then they're saying, Cuomo, now that you've changed your mind and you have long COVID and you're like mad at everybody else, do you apologize for this take back when you were on CNN, brought to you by Pfizer? Do you apologize for that take? So we'll look at how he used to act prior to all this, and then whether or not he apologizes for the shocking difference.
Everybody should know that about you, Byron Donald. You are not telling people to get vaccinated. You are not pushing it. You are not saying it's the right choice. You're saying you're not doing it and your family's not doing it, and you're leaving out of the equation that you can make other people sick, as if that doesn't matter. Okay?
Chris, did you not just hear my answer 30 seconds ago where I said, if you want to be protected from these variants and the original strain, please go get vaccinated. I promote you to do that. I just told you live on your own show that if you want to get vaccinated in America, go do it. But if there are Americans like myself who choose not to, please don't berate me for doing that. It is a personal choice I have made with my own healthcare. I am allowed to do that. I'm entitled to do
Byron, you're absolutely right to do it. You have a right to do it. Two different statements. Okay. Do you have the right? Of course, nobody's debating that except you guys as a false choice. What I'm saying is it right to do it? Have you spoken to a doctor? You're supposed to be a leader. Have you talked to the CDC and the people who are in Florida at the Department of Health about whether or not they think you made a good choice? Because if your answer is just then, well, I don't care what they say, this is me, I'm an American, that is being dumb as a proxy for being bold. And I don't think it's a good message because remember, it's not just you protecting yourself. It's you protecting me and other people from you. That's why you get vaccinated, not just for yourself. Important distinction. Go ahead.
Actually, the way vaccines work are to protect yourself. A vaccine basically gives you a special cocoon where you actually limit the worst harmful effects of the virus itself, or may not get it altogether, depending on your own personal physiology. So that's the way vaccines work. Now, to me personally, I did talk to a couple of doctors that I know about it. I told them I already had it and I'm 42. What do you think? And they said, yeah, you're fine. If that's what you want to do, go ahead and do it. They didn't come and say, no, you have to do it because of everybody else. Because if other people want to be protected, they have access to vaccines. Go get the vaccine. I would never tell anybody not to get vaccinated. I do totally support it if that's what somebody chooses to do.
Byron, I'm with you.
I don't know why this is hard. It's that simple.
Oh, listen, I totally agree with you. It is very simple. I think you're making it hard because you're seeing some kind of righteousness and a choice to do something that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But again, that's your right. What I'm saying is something else. You're wrong about how vaccines work. You're only giving part of the prophylaxis, okay? The other aspect to why you take the vaccine is it also reduces, not completely, nothing is perfect, and certainly this vaccine is not, but it also reduces your ability to communicate the virus and make other people infected. That part matters too.
Okay, now that's resurfacing. We've had conversations, we've talked.
Okay, so now we're going to hear Cuomo's response to this. Is he going to apologize for this massive flip-flop?
COVID. Tom and I are talking about the long vaccine and what that's doing. A lot of my friends are going through it. And long COVID. Not long vaccine, forgive me. Long COVID. A lot of friends are talking about it. We're 40, 50. You're sitting there saying, hey, what the hell is going on in my body? What's changed from that conversation with you and Byron to where you are today?
Well, a lot has changed and a lot needs to change that hasn't. Here's what matters to me about the clip. Apology? Of course not.
would you expect anything else? We'll let him go a little bit longer, but that's the bottom line. Am I going to apologize for just being paid by Pfizer and completely attacking people who had great points? And now I'm making that same point on my own podcast and making money off of it. Am I going to apologize for just berating people and belittling people and telling them how dumb they were? No, I'm not going to do that.
Byron Donalds comes on my show now. Okay. Why? Exchange of respect was never personal. I believe as a leader at that time, you had a duty to be thorough in what you were putting out there as opposed to just playing politics. Okay. This was never as simple as vaccine good, vaccine bad. Politics made it that.
Okay. So just a bunch of obfuscation. I mean, I don't apologize because people have ideas and you should be nuanced, even though I wasn't allowing Byron Donald to be nuanced at all in that clip. And now I've embraced the nuance because things have changed and the fact pattern has changed and it's no longer popular. And there's no longer a financial incentive to push anything with the vaccine. So this massive flip-flop has happened. Will there ever be any kind of an apology? I don't think so. I think there's just going to be a slow transition, and the New York Times kind of threw some bait in the water, see how it goes. Chris Cuomo, just kind of changed his mind. I also have long COVID. There's real effects to this. People are just chasing the money. This is one of the most well-known proverbs. It says, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. And the government does this all the time. And legacy media does this all the time. Public figures do this all the time. They just propagandize you like in the 1930s, where this is going to be the best thing ever, collectivization, co-op farming, utopia is coming, and then millions of people die. And there's no apology. There's just gaslighting of like, well, that's not what really happened. I mean, I wasn't really forcing people to do this. There was never any kind of compulsion. I mean, we tried to make people lose their jobs if they wouldn't do this. But, make an omelet, got to crack a few eggs. We see leaders doing this in the ancient world. When you look at the story of Moses and Pharaoh, God would send these plagues and Pharaoh would be scared to death. And he'd be like, all right, I'm good. The people can go. And then the plague would leave. And over again, like in Exodus 9:34, when Pharaoh saw the rain and hail and thunder had stopped, he sinned again. He and his officials hardened their hearts. And there's cognitive dissonance that comes with realizing you're so wrong, and it's just easier not to acknowledge it. There is fear of losing what you have, whether that is your position or your status or your influence. And then at the core of all of it, there is just pride. And anyone who's paying attention sees things like this, and it naturally angers you. And I think that's okay. There is such a thing as righteous anger when you're just lied to and taken advantage of. At the same time, part of what we do as believers is when we see things like this, we should use them as mechanisms to cause self-evaluation, because what the government did on a macro level and the media did on a macro level, I can do easily on a micro level. And I can push standards and expectations on others that I'm not willing to be held to myself, or I can really stand for beliefs, and those beliefs change, when I get the actual fact pattern, I realize I'm wrong. And will I be willing to stand 10 toes down and apologize and say I was wrong and explain why I was wrong and explain why I've changed and thank the people who helped me change and apologize to the people that I misled? Hopefully I will be able to do that. And we can learn from this macro situation to be better people on a micro level, because pride goes before destruction, not just at a macro level, not just when the government is too prideful to admit its fault, not just when giant media companies are huge political figures, huge public figures. But for me, in my personal life, if I'm so prideful that I can't admit a fault and admit the damage that I've done, then it will lead to destruction, a haughty spirit, like I'm too good for this, or I'm over this, or I'm above this. It goes before a fall. And I don't want to fall, and I don't want you to fall either. This has been episode 62 of the Clayton Tyner podcast. I want to thank you for continuing to rock with the podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Clayton Tyner. That's Tyner. And help support the channel, patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. We have our live Q&A this week. We do it once a month. It's so much fun. I want you to be there, but you got to sign up at patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. I love you. I'll see you on episode 63.